Hello. So in this video, we're going to compare some structural or technical elements from Euripides' Medea, the 5th century BCE Greek tragedy, and Guan Hanqing's Snow in Midsummer, the Yuan dynasty, early 14th century Zaju play, which is a form of Chinese opera. So part of the reason we're going to do this is I was reading Guan's play in the Norton Anthology of Drama, which also has Medea in it. And I noticed that there are several elements to Guan's play that are very similar to things that we see repeatedly in Greek tragedy. And I think they're interesting and worth commenting on. So one of the things, and in this instance, actually, Medea is not necessarily the best representation of this, but I like the pairing of Snow in Midsummer with Medea because both of them deal with similar thematic issues. You have a woman who is betrayed. You have issues of patriarchal control and how that can be destructive for not only individuals, but even for society as a whole. And you have these concerns with justice and right or wrong. So I think the pairing makes a lot of sense. One of the thematic elements that is shared between both of them are these appeals to fate. This idea that what happens to you is somehow destined to happen to you. And again, Medea is not necessarily the best example of this from Greek tragedy. There are a lot of other Greek tragedies that have lines something like, "Call no man happy until he's dead." Because basically you don't know, this idea is that fate is changeable, it is reversible. Someone who appears to be riding high today may be cast low tomorrow. Oedipus is perhaps the sort of prime example of this. He's the beloved king of Thebes. He's got a smoking hot MILF wife. He's the savior of the city. Everything seems to be amazing for Oedipus at the beginning of Sophocles' Oedipus the King. But by the end, boy howdy, things are not so good. So this is a very, very central idea in Greek tragedy. In Greek literature, ancient Greek literature across the board, the role of fate is very, very important. But in tragedy, it's especially important because you have a reversal of circumstances. So in Medea, we do get this referenced. And there's one particular reference that I think is a really interesting connection between this play and Snow in Midsummer. So this is Medea speaking. Yeah. This is part of a very, very long speech, and this is just a fairly short segment of it. No, sorry, this is the chorus. In conversation with Medea. So the chorus is talking about how some people are lucky and some people are unlucky, right? Good things happen to some people, bad things happen to some people. And they say here, there's one final grief that I'll mention. Supposing your children have grown up with plenty to live on, they're healthy, they're decent. If fortune decrees it, death comes and spirits their bodies away down to the underworld. What is the point then if the gods, adding on to the pains that we mortals endure for the sake of our children, send death, most distressing of all? Tell me, where does that leave us? So there can be this sort of fatalistic aspect to Greek tragedy. There's a lot of debate among classicists about whether or not Greek culture was fundamentally fatalist. Some people argue that they definitely were. Some people argue that it's more complex than that. But here what we're getting is this linkage between fate and death. You can be a mother, in this case, or a parent, who raises your children well, provides them everything they need, and they can still die. It can still be their fate to die. The gods can decree that, and there is nothing that you can do to stop it. So there is this fatalistic element here. And we get that kind of mirrored in Snow in Midsummer. When Duo-e has she's basically okay, so Donkey Zhang has inadvertently poisoned his father while trying to poison Mrs. Kai. Donkey Zhang is trying is going to try and blackmail Duo-e into marrying him. Mrs. Kai, after old Zhang has died, well, so when he's ill, I guess technically. Okay, so old Zhang is ill because Donkey Zhang has inadvertently poisoned him, because old Zhang drank the soup that Donkey had tried to poison Mrs. Kai with. And Duo-e says this. Mrs. Kai is upset about old Zhang's illness. Duo-e says, "It's no use grieving for him. All mortal men must die when their time is up. Some fall ill, some meet with accidents, some catch a chill, some are struck down by heat, some die of hunger, surfeit, or overwork. But every death has its cause. Human life is ruled by fate, and no man can control it. For our span of life is predestined. He has been here a few days only. He is not of your family, and he never sent you wedding gifts, sheep, wine, silk, or money. For a time you stayed together, but now he is dead and gone. I am not an unfilial daughter, but I fear what the neighbors may say, so stop your moaning and wailing. He is not the man you married as a girl." So we've got a couple of elements here. There's definitely still this, I would say, very Greek-style depiction of fate, right? Human life is ruled by fate, and no man can control it, for our span of life is predestined. Right? This is very, very similar to what we saw in Medea. No matter what you do, the gods can decide when you die. We have the same thing here. When it is your time to die, all mortal men must die when their time is up. No matter what the cause will be, you will die when it is your time to die. I think there's also the thing that's very different with Snow in Midsummer than in Medea is that Snow in Midsummer also has this very Confucian ethic to it. And that here, I would say, is almost linked to a Taoist type of fatalism, right? Because at the end, we have this bit where Duo-e says, I'm not an unfilial daughter, but I fear what the neighbors may say. So this idea of filial piety is really central to Confucianism, to give someone the proper respect that they deserve based on your relationship to them. But I think there's, and Confucianism is huge in Snow in Midsummer. Guan is very much in a cultural context in which Confucianism is the way that you look at the world. But I think there's also this fatalistic aspect is also Taoist in a way. Like it is linked to the idea of the way, the Tao, right? Because in Taoism, things occur. Things are because they are that way, right? And that's, you can either sort of resist the natural way that things are, but it will not avail you. You will, what is going to happen will still happen regardless of what attitude you take toward it, is kind of a fundamental principle of Taoism. We get that with Duo-e's fatalistic rhetoric here. This idea that Human life is ruled by fate and no man can control it. This is the Tao, or can be seen as the Tao. This is the way. Things happen as they are going to happen, and that guides our life. So that's one element. We have this issue of fate and fate's role in our life. The other thing that we have that I think is really interesting is we have references to mythic history. And I say mythic history because some of these figures that are referenced are probably historical figures or are even documentable historical figures, but they function as a kind of, they are mythologized in some way. Like they are legendary figures, since these don't necessarily deal with the gods, particularly in Snow and Midsummer. But these are legendary figures. They are mortals who have some sort of supernatural or more than merely mortal abilities or characteristics. So when Mistress Kai brings old Zhang and Donkey Zhang back to try and persuade / coerce Duo-yi to marry Donkey Zhang, Duo-yi rejects this. And she gives this speech to Mistress Kai about how Mistress Kai, should not marry somebody other than her dead husband. And there's this portion in it where she says, "Is there one like Lady Zhuo who stooped to serve in a tavern?" And the footnote here basically says, "Zhu Wenjun, the daughter of a rich man who eloped with Sima Jiangru, a famous Han Dynasty scholar. Since they were poor, they kept a small tavern in Chengdu, where she served as a barmaid." I'm not going to read all of the footnotes, but each of these things, or each of these references, are explained in the footnotes in the Norton Anthology. So is there one like Lady Zhuo, who stooped to serve in a tavern, or like Meng Guan, who showed such respect to her husband? The women today are different. You can neither tell their character from their speech, nor judge them by their actions. They are all of them faithless, all run after new lovers, and before their husbands' graves are dry, they set aside their mourning for new clothes. Where is the woman whose tears for her husband caused the great wall to crumble? Where is she who left her washing and drowned herself in the stream? Where is she who changed into stone through longing for her husband? And it goes on. There's more sort of general, oh, women are terrible, betrayers of men kind of bullshit. But basically we have this set of references to legendary figures who are linked to the situation that Duo-yi is responding to, and whose stories are meant as a model for how Mrs. Kai should be behaving. We get the same kind of thing in Medea. In an antistrophe within one of the choral sections, we have this. And again, this is something that maybe Medea is not actually the best example of this, because there are other Greek tragic plays where we get just like catalogs of specific mythic or historical or legendary figures. But what they are responding to in this section is Medea has either killed or is about to kill her children in the house. And the chorus, there's a sort of Schrodinger's element to this, because the chorus, Medea is in the house with the children. They know that she intends to kill the children. They don't know whether she's done it yet. But they say here in an antistrophe, in the choral ode, I've heard of just one other woman who dared to attack to hurt her own children. Ino, whom the gods once drove insane and Zeus's wife sent wandering from her home. And the footnote here says, Ino was one of the women who, in Dionysiac frenzy, participates in the ritual killing of Pentheus. Later she wanders from home and leaps to her death in the sea. Euripides depicts the story of Pentheus in the Bacchae. And that's actually really interesting because in the Bacchae, Agave is Pentheus's mother. But, so it says, Ino, whom the gods once drove insane and Zeus's wife sent wandering from her home, the poor woman leapt to sea with her children in unholy slaughter. She stepped down from a steep crag's rocky edge and died with her 2 children in the waves. What terrible deed could surpass such an outrage? O bed of their marriage, O woman's desire, such harm have you done, so much pain have you caused. So, it's interesting. This is a side note to the point that I'm actually making here. It's interesting that the chorus says, I've heard of just one other woman who dared to hurt her children. And then they mention Ino, who's associated with the Menaids in the Bacchae, where Agave plays a central role in murdering Pentheus. Maybe that's unconnected to the issue of madness, and they give Agave a pass because she was transported by Bacchus to an ecstatic state, but that seems like a bit of a stretch in terms of a pass. But the story of Ino is being presented here as, oh, Medea, you should learn from this mythic/legendary tale about how to not murder your children. So in both cases, we have these common elements, right? The question of fate and the role that fate plays in guiding human life on the one hand, and then the use of mythic or legendary or historical tales as a reference point for proper behavior. Now, I want to sort of be clear about what argument I'm making here ultimately. It is theoretically possible. Guan lives 1,800 years or so after the heyday of Greek tragedy. It is theoretically possible that Guan knew of a play like Medea or knew of Greek drama. Greek literature, drama, and stuff like this was preserved in the Arab world, and there was trade between the Arab world and China over the Silk Road. The Mongols who founded the Yuan dynasty did reach the Middle East. It's theoretically possible, but I think it's probably pretty unlikely that Guan was working from any sort of real substantial Greek influence. I think it's much more likely that he's just functioning primarily within a Chinese context. But what is striking, what's interesting, what I think is important about these two plays is they reflect these fundamental ways of building knowledge and understanding the world that are cross-cultural. Not universal necessarily, because there are different cultures that look at things in different ways, but the idea that mythology serves as a basis for modeling human behavior is a widely dispersed idea across a number of human cultures. The idea that fate is what guides human experience is a very, very common experience, is a very, very common conception across human cultures. So these things are very, very familiar to many people, even though they come out of distinctly different cultural, literary, religious, and philosophical traditions. We can sort of look at texts from across different cultures and find uniting human factors.